Hello. In 1980, Enrique Kiki Camarena, an outstanding investigator, took on a key role in the largest drug bust in Mexican history. This case not only led to the arrest of several gang members, but also opened the door to an unimaginable nightmare that would change his life forever. This is a story of betrayal in the world of crime, epitomized by Whitey Bulger, a notorious mob boss who went on the run on December 23, 1994. He received information from FBI agent John Connolly that a RICO indictment was about to be issued against him. From that moment on, Bulger lived in the shadows for 16 years, constantly fearing the day he would be discovered. So what turned Bulger, one of the most famous organized criminals, into a fugitive? Why was an FBI agent willing to help him? These questions make this story more dramatic than ever. Growing up as a young thug in South Boston, Bulger had a childhood rife with crime from petty theft to brawls. In 1943, he was arrested at just 14 years old and spent 5 years in a juvenile facility. After being released, Bulger joined the Air Force, but soon was imprisoned for assault and was discharged from the military. Returning to South Boston, he became an informant for the FBI, helping authorities take down several rival gang members. At that time, Bulger realized he had two choices: cooperate with his gang or become a traitor. However, when he discovered that the FBI was secretly betraying him, Bulger isolated himself in the shadows for a long 16 years, including 12 years on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, just behind Osama bin Laden. In the summer of 1983, tensions between Bulger and the FBI reached a boiling point. A horrific event occurred when an employee of Coin-O-Matic, a money laundering company associated with the Patriarca crime family, was kidnapped. Boston police raided a meat shop owned by Bulger and two other members, where they found the employee hanging from a meat rack. The victim had been brutally tortured for over 6 days. This discovery sparked a series of brutal retaliations from the Patriarca gang, leading to the immediate trial of 3 members of the Winter Hill Gang. The gang war drew the attention of the FBI, especially John Connolly, who had protected Bulger. Finally, in October 2011, Bulger was arrested and sentenced to 2 life terms, not only for extortion, but also for involvement in 11 murders. After being incarcerated in Florida, where he believed he would spend the rest of his life without the threat of any retaliation, Bulger was unexpectedly transferred to West Virginia. Just 1 day after arriving, he was brutally murdered. Prisoners broke into his cell at 6 a.m. and beat him with a sock filled with metal locks. Bulger's death was a cruel fate for a traitor. The victim's eyes and tongue were often cut out. Throughout his time as an informant for the FBI, he had betrayed too many people, and those individuals would never forget. Bulger's story proves one thing: traitors will ultimately pay the price, and that price is their own lives. In October 2009, Frederick Jerome Cobia fell into the hands of the law when he was arrested for the brutal crime of murdering 57-year-old Desmond Dunkley in a home in South Bay. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and burglary, but notably, his sentencing was postponed. The reason was that Frederick had acted as an informant in nearly 20 other cases, hoping that the government would protect him through the Witness Protection Program. Frederick did not hesitate to provide information about as many criminals as possible in hopes of avoiding prison or returning to life on the streets. He contacted lawyers, even calling in seasoned prosecutors and top police detectives to testify on his behalf. They all praised his cooperation with law enforcement, claiming that he not only helped put dangerous criminals behind bars, but also saved the life of a female officer by revealing a plot to assassinate her in prison. Judge Joseph Marks was taken aback during the trial. The prosecutor seemed to present a better defense for Frederick than his own attorney. He acknowledged, "I have never encountered a case like this in my 30 years of practicing law." However, the support Frederick received from law enforcement officials could not conceal his extensive and violent criminal record, especially the way he brutally killed Desmond Dunkley. He had tied the victim to a chair, savagely beaten him in the face with the butt of a pistol, before shooting him twice to ensure he was dead, then fled with the drugs he had stolen. Defense attorney Valeria suggested a 10-year sentence, but the judge could not accept this because it would mean Frederick would be free immediately. In the end, at the age of 47, Frederick was sentenced to 40 years in prison, meaning he could spend the rest of his life behind bars until he was over 70. In November 2008, Pedro and Margarito Flores, better known as the Flores twins, were arrested by the DEA in a major drug bust in Chicago. Immediately after their arrest, they faced a life-or-death choice: betray their enemies or accept spending the rest of their lives in prison. However, they chose not just anyone, they chose the godfather of the drug world, El Chapo. These two brothers had started their drug trafficking careers at the age of 7, learning how to transport goods across the border, choosing safe routes, and moving discreetly. By the age of 17, they were involved in cocaine trafficking and earned profits of over $1 million. With skill and determination, they quickly climbed the power ladder, becoming trusted associates of El Chapo. The arrest of the twins was the result of an extensive investigation into their drug trafficking activities, where they imported and distributed large quantities of cocaine and heroin from Mexico. They became one of the top distributors for the Sinaloa cartel, primarily responsible for spreading cocaine throughout the streets of Chicago, Columbus, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, New York, and Washington. Everything changed in September 2005 when they began achieving impressive sales after meeting El Chapo. They arranged to receive large shipments of cocaine and heroin on credit, since they did not have much money at the time. They picked up the goods at the border and transported them to Chicago, where they established their headquarters, but this alliance collapsed after they were arrested. The fear of living in prison drove the twins to cooperate, providing valuable information to the DEA about the inner workings of the Sinaloa cartel and El Chapo. Their assistance was crucial in the arrest of El Chapo, who was considered one of the most dangerous and unpredictable drug lords in the world. However, the decision to become informants came at a high price. Although the U.S. government promised to protect them, but the Flores twins forever became targets of the Sinaloa cartel, who viewed them as traitors. Instead of life sentences, they received only 14 years in prison. Ultimately, the judge delivered a stern statement: "I will not keep you in prison for life, but the reality is you have received life sentences. From now on, for the rest of your lives, you and your families will have to remain vigilant, always looking over your shoulders." Every time a car or motorcycle approached, they would wonder if it was someone coming to kill them. Whenever they started a car, they would worry if it would explode. This would be the rest of their lives. This is the current state of the Flores twins. They cannot return home and must live in hiding, always threatened by the Sinaloa cartel. In October 1989, Rene Enrique, a cold-blooded criminal and leader of a Mexican mafia gang born in California, was arrested and charged with the murder of Cynthia Galvedon. Instead of facing the death penalty, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. However, this could not change the nature of a vicious murderer, power-hungry even while incarcerated. In July 1991, a bloody event unfolded in an interview room at the Los Angeles County Jail. Enriquez, along with another accomplice, attacked Salvador Monbuenrostro, a leader of the Mexican mafia, stabbing him 30 times. The brutality of the attack made many inmates shudder, but fortunately, Salvador survived. The aftermath of this horrific attack led to Enriquez being transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison in 1993. As a gang member, Enriquez was held in a dark, windowless isolation cell in a special security unit, where he could not communicate with the outside world. Everything began to change in July 2003, when Enriquez officially declared his departure from the Mexican mafia. Hoping to escape his dark life, he decided to provide the U.S. government with crucial information about the crimes he had previously collaborated in. For Enriquez, cooperating was not only a form of repentance, but also a ticket out of prison that he yearned for. In 2014, something unprecedented occurred. Officials from at least 11 federal and state law enforcement agencies wrote letters to the parole board attesting to his contributions, affirming that crimes had been solved and prosecuted correctly due to his information. In February 2015, Enriquez appealed with a bold promise that if released, he would participate in the federal government's witness protection program. He had spent over a decade on the Mexican Mafia's hit list since cooperating with law enforcement in 2003. However, things were not as simple as he thought. He requested not to be labeled a registered sex offender and to be closely monitored by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but this request was quickly denied. At that time, California Governor Jerry Brown blocked his release for a very clear reason. Enriquez was a top target of the Mexican Mafia, and releasing him would endanger not only him, but also his family, parole officers, and the community where he would live. By November 2017, once again, Governor Jerry Brown denied Enriquez's request for clemency for similar reasons. However, this time, Enriquez expressed genuine remorse and stated, "I cannot change the past, but I can contribute to the future." Although he continued to appeal until July 2022, after many years of fighting against fate, Enriquez was finally granted clemency and entered the Federal Witness Protection Program, opening a new chapter in his life, a chapter fraught with risks and stress, but also filled with hope for a new life. On February 7, 1985, the atmosphere in Guadalajara seemed to hang in the air as if everything were waiting for something terrible to happen. 4 vehicles full of armed men waited outside the U.S. consulate, filled with determination and brutality. When Enrique Kiki Camarena, a courageous undercover agent, stepped out of the consulate, they immediately sprang into action. The sight of a man being kidnapped in broad daylight right before the eyes of many was not only an act of terrorism, but also a brutal act of revenge by the most ruthless drug cartel in Mexico. Enrique, or Kiki, as everyone often called him, was born into a middle-class family in July 1947. When he was just 9 years old, his family decided to immigrate to California, but life there was not as expected. They fell into poverty. Despite this, Kiki never gave up hope. He graduated from high school in 1966 and then joined the U.S. Marine Corps, serving until 1970 when he was honorably discharged. After that, Kiki began working for the Imperial County Drug Enforcement Agency as an undercover agent. Amid the fierce war on drugs, Kiki faced dangerous smuggling organizations, including the massive network known as the French Connection. Although the U.S. government dismantled this network in the 1960s, but that very destruction paved the way for other dark cartels to rise rapidly. When the DEA was established in 1973, Kiki was recruited as a special agent due to his fluency in both English and Spanish. In 1980, the DEA opened an office in Guadalajara, and Kiki was immediately assigned there, where drug transactions took place daily. Kiki's decision to move to Guadalajara was a risky one. His wife believed it was a good opportunity for their family, but they did not foresee the tragedy that awaited them. Kiki's mission was to dismantle the core of the Guadalajara cartel led by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the godfather of the drug trade. One day in 1994, Kiki received a tip-off about a massive marijuana plantation in a remote village called Rancho Buffalo. When Kiki and his pilot friend, Alfredo Zavala Avalar, confirmed the existence of this enormous field, valued at up to $8 billion, they quickly reported it to their superiors. However, things were not that simple. A major raid was planned, but a surprise occurred. The Mexican government had warned the farm owner in advance. As a result, by the time law enforcement arrived, everything had turned into a ghost town. It was the largest DEA bust, bringing joy to the U.S. government, but also causing worry among drug lords. The atmosphere in the city became suffocating and danger surrounded Kiki. Although innocent Americans continued to be murdered, Kiki became the top target. On February 7, 1985, after a source provided detailed information about Kiki, the drug lords plotted their revenge. Ernesto Carrillo, a notorious drug dealer, ordered Kiki's kidnapping with the help of corrupt officers within the Mexican intelligence agency. As Kiki left the consulate to meet his wife for lunch, a man suddenly appeared, presenting his DFS badge and informing Kiki that high-ranking officials wanted to meet with him. In surprise, and without time to react, Kiki was immediately surrounded and forced into a car. Kiki was then taken to a safe house where he endured brutal torture. A later autopsy revealed he had been savagely beaten, burned, and had his spine broken. Not only Kiki, but also his pilot friend Alfredo Zavala could not escape this tragic fate. He was kidnapped by El Chapo at the airport and taken to a secret location for torture simply for his connection to the raid. In the end, Kiki died in agony, his body wrapped in plastic, while Alfredo Zavala was also wrapped in plastic but still alive. Both were buried, but tragically, Alfredo Zavala was buried alive. Their deaths became symbols of the brutality and cruelty of the drug world, reminding everyone of the dangers of this war. Kiki Camarena's fate came to a close, but the story of his life will forever live on in the memories of those who have heard of the courage and tragedy of a man fighting against evil.
In the 1970s, undercover DEA agent Michael Vigil was preparing to embark on a perilous mission, where even a tiny mistake could cost him his life. A week earlier, Mike had met with a brutal Mexican drug cartel. Thanks to the support of a confidential informant, he had pretended that his main supplier had just been killed, and he needed to find a new drug source to supply his hungry customers in the U.S. Now he was about to meet them at a local restaurant to finalize the deal. Mike's convoy consisted of over a dozen Mexican federal agents, all armed with heavy weapons ready to take down any threat. These agents acted quickly and decisively, with no time for small talk. However, Mike, a man born to face danger, understood that a lack of control from the Mexican federal police could result in a ruthless shootout. As the convoy entered the town center, the agents quickly took up strategic positions, prepared to fire at any signs of danger. Mike stopped the car in front of the restaurant, his heart racing as he tried to remain calm and prepare for the worst-case scenarios. He knew his survival depended on keeping a cool head and acting precisely in a highly dangerous environment. Soon after the drug dealers entered, their eyes filled with malice and suspicion. Mike could sense the underlying tension in the air, but he showed no signs of fear. Over the years, he had learned to soothe criminals with polite conversation and a few cleverly placed jokes. This was a high-stakes game, and Mike was playing it with the finesse of a seasoned veteran. He was certain the dealers would demand to see a large sum of cash before agreeing to hand over the drugs. Prepared for this, Mike had cleverly hidden bundles of fake cash, with only two $100 bills wrapping around a stack of smaller denominations. When they asked to see the money, he rolled up his pant leg, revealing the substantial bundles. They glanced over, greedy smiles spreading across their faces. But just as the deal was about to go down, one of the drug dealers pulled out a shiny gold gun, his voice deep and menacing. "If you are a federal agent, we will kill you." The threat hung in the air like a sharp knife, but Mike did not show any signs of fear. He knew that even a drop of sweat or an ill-timed furrow of his brow could cost him his life. As the bargaining continued, the situation outside suddenly took a quick turn. Just as Mike stepped out of the restaurant to wait for the drug truck, everything erupted into chaos. A Mexican federal agent, unable to maintain his composure, burst from his hiding place and aimed his gun at the drug dealer. The dealer reacted lightning fast, grabbing the gun and swinging it toward the agent. A gunshot rang out and in front of Mike. The blood of his comrades splattered into the air. Without thinking, Mike saw the dealer aim his gun at him and fire two shots that barely missed his head. With a swift motion, Mike drew his own weapon and fired back, the bullet piercing the dealer's chest, causing him to stagger, gasping for breath before collapsing to the ground. In the treacherous underworld of Mexico, death lurked around every unavoidable corner. Michael Vigil continued his mission, determined to bring the drug dealers to light. To understand the journey of a courageous agent like Mike, we must start from the turbulent early stages of his career. Michael Vigil went from living in a small town to becoming a renowned DEA agent, starting with a burning dream ignited by his parents. Hardworking individuals imbued with integrity, courage, and a fierce love for justice. Thus, Mike was determined to pursue a degree in criminology and continuously applied to numerous federal and state agencies. His career truly took off when the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, was established on July 1st, 1973, after President Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs. The mission of the DEA was to combat global drug trafficking, becoming the only agency authorized to operate both domestically and internationally. Mike was captivated by the undercover operations of the DEA, where he realized that this job was like a high-stakes game of chess, filled with calculation and risk. This was the beginning of his long journey marked by blood and tears. Mike's first assignment was at the Albuquerque, New Mexico field office. From the very first moment, he sensed danger lurking like a wild beast. In his autobiography, Mike wrote that undercover work was not for the faint-hearted. The mind had to remain alert, sharp and quick enough to react to every unexpected situation. Drug deals were often unpredictable, and drug dealers were always ready to shift the dynamics to their advantage. A single mistake could not only cost him an opportunity, but also his life. One of his strengths was his ability to embody any necessary role, and he was fluent in Spanish. To infiltrate high-level drug trafficking networks, Mike had to immerse himself in their world. He dressed in stylish clothing, wearing expensive sports jackets, Italian loafers, and sparkling diamond rings along with long gold chains. The heroin dealers in New Mexico were seasoned criminals, many of whom had previously served time for drug trafficking. Mike easily blended into their criminal world, honing his undercover skills. He knew how to erase any doubts about his identity as a federal agent, transforming himself into a cold-hearted and ruthless drug dealer. Mike not only spoke their language but also understood their habits, immersing himself in their cunning ways. He constantly walked the line between life and death, facing the risk of exposure every second, yet always managed to escape from the most perilous situations. During one operation, Mike carried a listening device to record negotiations with the drug dealers, but unfortunately, the device's battery leaked and acid began to corrode his stomach. Mike vividly remembered the smell of burning flesh, the searing pain that nearly became unbearable. But he showed no signs of panic, enduring the pain for hours as knowing that if he were discovered, the price would be far more horrific. When forced to try drugs, Mike skillfully declined, making the dealers believe that he was only interested in money and not tempted by addiction. Each time he escaped suspicion, he realized that his luck could run out at any moment. Even a single wrong word could cost him his life. However, over the years, he developed a sixth sense that allowed him to read people in an instant, recognizing life and death signals. In the dark world in which Mike lived, where trust was as fragile as a spider's thread and death lurked around every corner, that sixth sense had saved him more than once. Mike's journey was an unceasing battle between life and death, a fight he was determined never to give up. During Operation Heroin B, Mike painstakingly built trust with many drug lords through his network of informants, individuals who introduced him to key players in the underworld. From there, he began conducting undercover transactions, all aimed at one goal: capturing dangerous criminals. The ringleaders constantly challenged him, interrogating him about every detail of his connections, scrutinizing his past, and grilling him about other drug dealers who could vouch for him. Walking a razor's edge, Mike had to carefully consider every word. Each response needed to be convincing, but not too specific, like a performer in a high-stakes play. He knew that these drug dealers were greedy individuals solely interested in profit, their eyes lighting up at the mention of money, filled with ambition and devoid of empathy. Before entering any dangerous situation, Mike always practiced and adjusted his fabricated story along with the intel he had gathered. He understood that even a small mistake could lead to serious consequences, even death. A memorable operation took place in the mid-1970s when the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, launched Operation Heroin B to combat the wave of drugs flooding into the United States from Mexico. Mike's mission was to take down the largest and most dangerous heroin dealer in the West at the time, James Orlando Quintana. Quintana was not just an ordinary criminal. He ran a tightly organized drug empire with a network stretching from major cities to Mexico. Even other drug lords had to tread carefully around him. Quintana was intelligent and charismatic, capable of manipulating and controlling those around him, like a conductor leading an orchestra. He was born to lead but chose the path of crime instead of righteousness, and his fate would be no less than a tragic disaster. The DEA's investigation into Quintana began with a potential informant who was serving time in prison. Although there was no direct link to Quintana, He could introduce Mike to a low-level smuggler working for him, Henry Gutierrez. This informant was released briefly, and Mike had to closely monitor his every move to ensure no incidents occurred. The situation became tense, and Mike had to maintain his highest level of performance. Eventually, Mike was introduced to Isaac Rubelet, Quintana's right-hand man who executed orders for both Quintana and Gutierrez. The negotiations went smoothly, and a meeting with Quintana and Gutierrez was arranged at a local bar. Although they were suspicious, but Mike managed to convince them that he was a genuine heroin dealer, ready to do business. The DEA decided to use diamonds for the heroin exchange, forcing Quintana and Gutierrez to deal directly with Mike. They collected several diamond rings from a local jeweler, and Mike fabricated a story about having just robbed a jewelry store in New Mexico. Quintana and Gutierrez quickly became engrossed in the exchange, and the transaction was completed. When the DEA coordinated with state and local agencies to execute the arrest, everything went smoothly without any resistance. Mike confidently entered the office where Quintana and Rubelet were being held, introducing himself as a DEA agent and marking the conclusion of a highly successful operation, a turning point in the war on drugs. Quintana was released on bail pending trial, but he was determined not to return to prison. After more than a year of searching, the U.S. Marshals, with Mike's assistance, finally located him in a house in Kansas City. When they stormed in, the scene they witnessed sent chills down their spines. Quintana's body lay in the hallway, next to a handgun. He had chosen to end his life rather than return to the cold walls of prison. His reign of terror had come to an end, but Mike couldn't help but wonder, if he had chosen a different path, would the world have seen something better from him? Quintana's legacy would forever be just a shadow of despair and suffering. After many years of service in the U.S., Mike decided to take a greater risk by delving deep into the brutal underground world of Mexico. Driven by a desire to bring criminals to justice, Mike applied to the DEA office in Sonora, Mexico. With an impressive track record, he was immediately selected for the position. However, working in Mexico was not the same as in the U.S. The Mexican Federal Judicial Police, MFJP, was infamous for its corruption and incompetence. From the very beginning, Mike faced a series of obstacles created by other personnel. Some of his intel was intercepted. They lied, saying he wasn't there, and advised people not to call back. Despite this, Mike was determined not to give up easily. He gradually identified a few reliable MFJP officers to collaborate with on drug busts. However, he understood that they were primarily skilled in field operations without much investigative prowess. Thus, the DEA would conduct investigations first and only involve the MFJP when necessary for arrests and drug seizures. Mike always organized drug transactions in public places to minimize the risk of being robbed or kidnapped for ransom. But with Mexican drug lords, their ruthlessness was akin to a game of Russian roulette filled with unpredictability. In one operation, while Mike was hiding in a hotel waiting for news from his informant, there was suddenly a loud knock on the door. Thinking it was his informant, so he opened the door and froze before 8 armed men, all holding semi-automatic weapons. The ringleader, with a deep and threatening voice, demanded to see Mike while the others loomed behind like hungry tigers. In the next room, the Mexican agents were completely unaware of the tense situation unfolding. Mike requested to speak privately with the ringleader. As he stepped into the room, the thug's rough hands patted Mike down for hidden weapons, but he was unaware that Mike had prepared for every eventuality. In that life-or-death moment, Mike remained calm, but the harsh reality hit him when it became clear. These men were the judicial police, and they mistook Mike for a wealthy drug dealer coming to share profits. Realizing the severity of the situation, Mike quickly drew his concealed firearm and aimed it at the officer's mouth, threatening to shoot if he didn't comply. His heart raced as adrenaline surged through him, prompting Mike to burst out of the hotel room and shout for assistance. Once again, luck was on his side. The surprised state police had no time to react, raising their hands in surrender as Mike and the MFJP team disarmed them. It was yet another narrow escape, a testament to the constant dangers Mike faced while working undercover in Mexico. However, if you think working in Mexico was dangerous enough, Colombia was truly an adventure into the lion's den, where death lurked around every corner. After years of facing drug gangs in Mexico, Mike was appointed as the head of the DEA office in Medellin, Colombia, a place where death and violence had become part of daily life. Although DEA regulations allowed agents to serve abroad for a maximum of 6.5 years, but Medellin's reputation as the most violent and dangerous city in the world prompted them to make a special exception. They needed someone experienced like Mike to deal with the horrific situation there. The power of Colombia's drug gangs was like a vast web of violence with discarded corpses lining the streets as their trademark. In his first week, Mike witnessed horrific scenes, decapitated bodies, blood flowing freely, while passers-by treated the gruesome sights as mere obstacles in their path. Medellin was home to the most notorious gangs led by Pablo Escobar, along with other cold-blooded criminals like Carlos Leder Rivas and the Ochoa brothers. Stepping into this world, Mike understood that coordinating with the Colombian National Police, CNP, was inevitable. The CNP officers lived in constant fear, with a $600 bounty on their heads imposed by Escobar. A stark reminder that their lives were merely numbers. Not wasting any time, Mike immediately sprang into action. One of his early significant successes was the arrest of Harold Rosenthal, a fugitive from the U.S. involved in drug trafficking. This arrest quickly turned Mike into a target for assassination, but what worsened the attacks against him was the raid on the infamous Tranquilandia cocaine processing lab belonging to the Medellin cartel. The raid resulted in the destruction of nearly 14 tons of cocaine worth over $1 billion, sending shockwaves through the criminal underworld. The assassins hired by drug traffickers often used motorcycles to pursue their targets in crowded traffic. They would get close to the victim and open fire at close range. A deadly tactic. One evening when Mike left the DEA office late, he heard the sound of a motorcycle revving up behind him. The bike sped toward him, nearly tailgating his car. Headlights off, a common assassination trick of the Medellin cartel. Two men on the bike glanced at Mike as they passed, with the passenger tightly gripping a gun on his thigh. Mike wondered what had stopped them from killing him in that moment. Perhaps they just wanted to send a message without getting blood on their hands. After a year in Medellin, the U.S. ambassador decided to close the office due to increasing threats from the cartel. Mike moved to Barranquilla, in northern Colombia, where he took on the role of office chief. At this time, he received the devastating news of the brutal death of his close friend, Agent Kiki Camarena, who had been viciously murdered by the Guadalajara cartel in Mexico. When a DEA agent falls, the message from the U.S. government is always clear. If you cross the line with our agents, we will devote every resource to hunt you down and bring those responsible to justice. Driven by grief and an intense determination to avenge his fallen friend, Mike quickly joined the hunt for the criminals, resolved not just to wage a battle, but a life-or-death war. The DEA launched a global manhunt to capture those who killed Agent Kiki Camarena, including notorious criminals like Miguel Felix Gallardo, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and drug supplier Juan Ramon Mata Ballesteros from Honduras. They expanded phone-tapping operations and activated an extensive network of informants across Latin America, the Caribbean, and Europe. As a result, the DEA discovered Mata Ballesteros' hideout in Cartagena, Colombia. Mata had been on the DEA's radar since 1970 when he was caught with 54 kilograms of cocaine at Dulles International Airport near Washington. However, he had escaped from federal custody and continued to evade the DEA at the last moment. In an operation led by Mike, the DEA monitored Jamie Garcia, a familiar associate of Mata. Eventually, they intercepted a critical conversation. Garcia was calling home to report that the boss was on his way. Mike and his team immediately recognized that Mata was heading for a meeting. They assembled a heavily armed task force preparing for a swift raid on the house. Mata attempted to flee, but couldn't outrun the pursuing agents. He ultimately jumped over a wall and fell to the ground. As he lay on his back, he suddenly pointed a gun at Mike's head, preparing to end his life. But Mike was quicker. He drew his weapon, ready to finish Mata off. However, in that tense moment, Mata exclaimed, "Don't shoot. I can escape from prison, but I can't escape from the grave." An unexpected situation arose when Mata boldly negotiated with Mike, saying, "If you let me go, I'll give you $3 million and the money will be here in just 20 minutes. Despite being in a perilous position, but Mike refused the deal, cuffed Mata, and led him out of the house. On the flight back to the prison, Mata turned to Mike with a challenging look and said, "I want to congratulate you, because for the past 20 years, no one has been able to catch me." Michael Vigil's legacy is deeply etched in the history of the DEA, associated with some of the agency's largest and most successful operations. One of his most notable achievements was participating in drug enforcement campaigns involving 36 countries across the Caribbean, Mexico, and Central and South America. After the events of September 11th and the fall of the Afghan regime, the U.S. faced a new wave of drugs, particularly opiates. To combat this, Vigil designed and implemented a prevention campaign in cooperation with 25 countries, including China and Russia. Although he retired a decade ago as the DEA's International Executive Director, but he continues to advise on counterterrorism and drug trafficking issues. His knowledge and experience have drawn attention from both the government and the media. But behind that public persona lies a man who spent years facing death, living in fear and stress. The name Michael Vigil will forever be inscribed in the annals of the DEA and remains a source of terror for the most brutal criminals he encountered. His legacy is not only one of success, but also of courage in confronting evil, symbolizing a relentless fight that never truly ends. The story you are about to hear may seem like it's straight out of an action movie, but it is entirely true. It tells the tale of an undercover agent from the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, who succumbed to the temptations of money. As an undercover agent, he built and ran a drug empire for over 7 years, raking in tens of millions of dollars. With his skills, he made it incredibly difficult for U.S. law enforcement to capture him. They even had to call upon Interpol for assistance in chasing him down. His life was filled with unbelievable stories, so much so that even crime novels wouldn't dare imagine such tales. The story revolves around the thrilling life of a drug lord who was once an undercover agent. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan launched a decisive campaign to combat the widespread drug epidemic across the U.S. The main goal of this campaign was to cut off the drug trafficking routes from South America through the Caribbean. However, drug cartels quickly adapted to the new situation. When faced with intense crackdowns in the eastern region, they shifted direction, establishing new routes through Mexico into California. The city of Los Angeles, known as the City of Angels, suddenly became the epicenter of the cocaine storm. The Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, faced an unprecedented challenge. Each year, they carried out approximately 100,000 arrests, with 18,000 to 20,000 directly related to drugs. Notably, throughout the 1980s, the LAPD seized record amounts of cash and drugs in these arrests. However, the wave of drug crime soon overwhelmed local law enforcement, forcing the DEA to intervene. Among the pioneers of this battle, Agent Darnell Garcia stood out with his extensive experience. Before joining the DEA in 1978, Garcia had honed his skills through years of service with the Los Angeles Police Department. Alongside Garcia was Victor Guerrero, his close friend and colleague in the fight against drugs. Guerrero continued to work undercover for the FBI, and his identity was kept strictly confidential to ensure his safety during dangerous missions. Garcia, Williams, and Hartford were three brave agents, united by their friendship and shared mission. Each day they faced danger, plunging into what seemed like an impossible war to stop drugs from flooding the streets. Among them, Garcia stood out for his extraordinary courage. He was not only familiar with the city's streets, but also possessed sharp instincts, always accurately assessing situations and acting swiftly and effectively. Terry Bowers, a former assistant U.S. attorney, recalled his time working with Garcia with admiration. As an undercover agent, Garcia had a unique ability to blend in and operate efficiently in the criminal underworld. Bowers remarked that not only did Garcia excel in his missions, but he also created the image of a tough, decisive man. Garcia's persona wasn't just a reality, but also carried a bit of legend within the law enforcement community. Darnell Garcia, originally from New York, moved to Los Angeles with his family and grew up there. After graduating from high school, Garcia joined the military and served for 3 years during the Vietnam War. Upon returning from the war, he pursued higher education at the University of Los Angeles, while also developing a strong passion for martial arts. Under the guidance of Chuck Norris, A movie star and martial arts champion, Garcia trained relentlessly. His persistence and talent propelled him to the top, and Garcia won the international championship in Long Beach. Following in his mentor's footsteps, Garcia ventured into acting, appearing in several films, including a role in Bruce Lee's legendary work Way of the Dragon. His competitive spirit and desire to succeed made Garcia a rising star in the martial arts world. However, in a city full of contradictions like Los Angeles, where extreme wealth coexisted with extreme poverty, law enforcement officers like Garcia constantly faced the temptations of large sums of money. This was an ethical challenge they had to struggle with, especially when they had families to take care of. Garcia began craving a lavish lifestyle that his DEA salary couldn't provide. Before him was an enticing shortcut to the life he dreamed of, and that temptation became too strong for him to resist. Unable to resist, Garcia decided to step onto the dark path despite the cost of his integrity. At first, he merely took cash from confiscations, justifying it to himself as a deserved reward for the risks and dangers he faced every day. Garcia told himself, "I'm risking my life every day to protect the community." Earning a paltry salary and getting harassed. Taking a little money from the drug dealers doesn't hurt anyone. But Garcia didn't stop there. He dragged his two close colleagues, Ed Williams and Brian Hartford, into the spiral of crime. The three agents quickly realized that stealing drugs was as easy as taking money. Darnell Garcia had become the embodiment of law enforcement's worst nightmare. The reality is, when undercover agents operate too long without a strong moral compass, the line between right and wrong can gradually blur, especially in the 1980s when drug trafficking could bring in millions of dollars. The temptation became nearly irresistible. Corruption spread throughout the police force, and Garcia and his accomplices became part of it. They operated right within the DEA without being detected. Garcia had lost all respect for the agency he was serving. He saw the flaws in the management system and didn't hesitate to exploit them to carry out his schemes. With every successful theft, Garcia became more daring. The peak came in January 1983 when Garcia and his accomplices stole nearly 0.5 kilogram of cocaine from a DEA seizure. To cover up their crime, they used the experience they had accumulated over the years of chasing drug traffickers, acting like double agents straddling two worlds, justice and crime. Garcia had learned and applied the very tricks he had witnessed while working as an undercover agent. Mimicking the techniques of drug dealers, he mixed cocaine with baking soda to increase its volume. After taking the majority of the cocaine from the evidence bag, Garcia replaced it with baking soda, but left behind a small amount of cocaine. When the DEA checked, they still found traces of cocaine and had no suspicion of his fraudulent behavior. This was the result of applying the sophisticated techniques he had observed during his time as an undercover agent. Garcia's plan operated perfectly, and the DEA officials didn't notice any changes in the evidence bags. In the first 2 years, Garcia carried out 10 drug thefts with a total value of nearly $300,000. He skillfully used his insider knowledge of investigation procedures to maintain a steady supply of drugs. Garcia monitored suspects, identified drug stash locations, and acted before the DEA made their arrests. The plan was simple but incredibly effective. He was confident that both the drug dealers and himself would remain silent. As a result, no reports were filed and no one suspected a thing. Garcia expertly played both sides, hiding behind his DEA badge to avoid retaliation from drug traffickers. John Moff, the former head of Interpol in the U.S., who led a drug enforcement team for the FBI in the 1980s, commented, "Drug dealers are always ready to protect their assets with heavy weapons. However, they're also smart enough not to act recklessly and attack the police." Garcia seemed to be untouchable. Over time, Hartford, Williams, and Garcia expanded their operations, building their own drug empire. From stealing money, they transitioned to controlling the supply of cocaine. With a ready market, Garcia only needed the right people to distribute the drugs, and he knew exactly where to find them through informants from previous investigations. Those who once provided him with information had now become tools to sell drugs on the streets. This was a huge irony in drug enforcement, where investigators were in constant contact with criminals. The biggest challenge for law enforcement officers is to avoid being drawn into the criminal world themselves. But the line between an officer and a criminal can sometimes be astonishingly thin. With the experience of working alongside drug dealers throughout his career, Garcia and his accomplices easily set up a distribution network that could rival any gang in the city. Their business grew rapidly beyond expectations, and Garcia and his partners amassed millions in profits. However, this massive amount of money, initially their goal, soon became a significant problem. They had no way to legitimize the funds. The government had introduced strict regulations on depositing money in banks, and depositing too much would attract unwanted attention. As a result, Garcia and his partners had to handle large amounts of cash, which became incredibly troublesome and dangerous. Facing the challenge of storing their illicit fortune, Garcia involved his girlfriend, Wendy Bedford, a legal secretary in a money laundering scheme. Bedford cleverly bought cashier's checks worth $9,900, a carefully chosen figure to avoid the $10,000 reporting threshold required by law. Once they accumulated enough checks, Garcia sought a safe place to stash the enormous amount of money, and he found the ideal destination: Switzerland. In 1983, Garcia and his two accomplices traveled to Zurich, the haven of discreet and powerful banking. There each opened a secret bank account. In their first deposit, Garcia transferred a total of 12 cashier's checks worth $100,000. It was an impressive figure, but it was only the beginning of their criminal empire. At the DEA office in Los Angeles, Garcia continued to exploit his position to cover up his increasingly bold drug-dealing activities. By 1984, he began stealing large quantities of drugs from the DEA storage, taking 1 kilogram at a time, as believing the agency wouldn't notice the losses. Victor Guerrero, Garcia's friend and an undercover FBI agent, revealed that Garcia had such disdain for the DEA that he openly criticized the agency for its shortcomings, from its lack of resources to its inefficiency. In 1985, the DEA decided to transfer Garcia from Los Angeles to Detroit, but he firmly refused, resulting in his dismissal. A colleague remarked that Garcia was never an outstanding agent and had always been dissatisfied since the start of his career with the DEA. However, Garcia didn't back down. He retaliated by filing a lawsuit against the DEA for discrimination. Surprisingly, Garcia won the case, forcing the DEA to reinstate him, a victory that only boosted his recklessness. In October 1984, a serious incident occurred when 1 kilogram of heroin was reported missing from the DEA's evidence storage. Initially, suspicion fell on the evidence supervisor, but he denied any involvement. Upon reviewing the registration logs, multiple agents, including Garcia, had access to the storage. The DEA launched an internal investigation and requested that the suspects take polygraph tests. However, Garcia cleverly refused, avoiding a test he would surely fail. Exploiting the rule that employees couldn't be forced to take polygraph tests, Garcia escaped the tough situation and continued to challenge the investigators. By 1985, after the investigation yielded no clear results, the DEA expanded its scope to include Brian Harford and Garcia. Yet Garcia remained unfazed, his greed deeply rooted in his mind, making him believe that the DEA would never uncover his illegal activities. This overconfidence made Garcia bolder by the day. He and his accomplices secretly surveilled drug dealers' safe houses, and by November 1985, they were ready to strike. Their target was one of the biggest dealers in Los Angeles. During the raid, Garcia discovered a massive stash of 182 kilograms of cocaine valued at an estimated $18 million, one of the largest drug seizures in Los Angeles history. However, no press conference was held, and no photos were taken with the mayor. In reality, Garcia never reported this seizure at all, and the DEA had no knowledge of the event. Garcia took all the cocaine to supply his own distribution network. To conceal the millions of dollars in illegal profits, Garcia and his accomplices transferred the money directly into secret European bank accounts, using cash deposits to avoid detection, while Garcia and his partners were reveling in their sense of invincibility. An unexpected turn of events occurred in 1986. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department arrested 2 notorious drug dealers, and under the pressure of interrogation, they revealed a shocking piece of information. One of their drug suppliers was Brian Harford, a DEA agent operating in Los Angeles. The investigation quickly expanded, exposing the close relationship between Harford Garcia and Williams. The DA began closely monitoring the three men, but had to proceed with extreme caution as internal investigations are always delicate, especially when the subjects are well-versed in every tactic and could be on guard. Gradually, pieces of the puzzle started to come together. Harford was frequently visiting Garcia's apartment near the DEA headquarters. The apartment staff revealed that Garcia always paid his rent in cash, an unusual sign. The deeper the investigation went, the more mysterious Garcia became. The apartment seemed to be just one link in his complicated life. Another suspicious clue was Garcia's sudden and inexplicable wealth, which further heightened investigators' doubts about his shady activities. In 1987, Garcia built a mansion in Rancho Palos Verdes, an upscale suburb in Southern California. With a DEA salary of around $40,000 to $50,000 per year in the early 1980s. How could Garcia afford a $500,000 house? When a friend warned him about the attention he was attracting, Garcia skillfully explained that he had inherited a large sum of money and borrowed the rest. However, the investigators did not relent and expanded the investigation to include those close to Garcia, hoping to trace evidence of his money laundering operations. Investigators discovered that Garcia led a double life with both a wife and a mistress, but it was unclear whether these women were aware of his illegal activities. Despite being closely monitored, Garcia didn't reveal any signs of criminal behavior. Detectives never saw him meeting with any drug dealers, they only had suspicions, with no concrete evidence linking Garcia to any criminal activity. However, an anomaly appeared when they checked Garcia's phone records. He frequently made calls to a number in New York, which caught the DEA's attention. The DEA contacted the New York Police Department for further investigation. The mysterious number belonged to Howard Calhoun, a former DEA informant who had since become a notorious drug dealer. When interrogated, Calhoun denied any connection to Garcia, Harford, or Williams, but the investigators weren't easily fooled. A search of Calhoun's apartment led to a significant breakthrough. They found letters and notes containing Garcia's initials and phone number. This was undeniable evidence. Finally, Calhoun and his girlfriend confessed that Garcia and his accomplices had been sending drugs via courier to Coloni's apartment from an address in Los Angeles, which turned out to be Garcia and Brian Harford's address. Calhoun revealed that Garcia and his associates sent drugs for him to sell, and he then sent the profits back to California using the same method. This drug trafficking system, though simple, was remarkably effective and provided the DEA with crucial evidence. The courier service receipts became the key to arresting the group of rogue agents. To prevent Garcia and his accomplices from warning each other, the DEA planned to arrest all three at the same time. After 3 years of intense investigation, November 22, 1988 was selected as the day of action. Task forces were ready to end one of the most complex internal corruption cases in DEA history. The day of action arrived. Brian Harford and Ed Williams were arrested smoothly without resistance. However, when authorities surrounded Garcia's home, they found only pictures of his lavish lifestyle. Garcia, the DEA agent turned drug kingpin, had seemingly vanished into thin air just hours before his arrest. Garcia's mysterious disappearance raised a big question. How did he know about the impending arrest? The answer quickly emerged when investigators discovered that another girlfriend of Garcia's worked at the Los Angeles County Courthouse. She admitted to seeing the arrest warrant and warning Garcia, though she didn't know where he had fled. The failure to apprehend Garcia was a huge disappointment for investigators, but they didn't give up. In the following months, a federal grand jury in Los Angeles issued 3 additional indictments. Los Angeles County charged Garcia with 26 serious counts, including conspiracy to possess and distribute drugs, as well as numerous money laundering and tax evasion violations. The hunt for Garcia became a test of patience and investigative skill. Authorities believed it was only a matter of time before Garcia made a mistake and revealed himself. The DEA relentlessly investigated Garcia's past, combed through every page of his personnel records, and thoroughly scrutinized his network of relationships. They increased pressure on anyone who might know Garcia's whereabouts, but every lead seemed to hit a dead end. Unexpectedly, 2 months after Garcia's disappearance, a glimmer of hope surfaced when police received a tip about Garcia's appearance at a club in North Hollywood. Not wanting to miss the opportunity, Federal and local law enforcement quickly launched a large-scale operation on the ground and in the air. They were determined not to let Garcia escape again, though the likelihood of Garcia still being in Los Angeles was slim. But with someone as cunning and arrogant as Garcia, anything was possible. However, for the second time, in 2 months, authorities came up empty-handed. They still hadn't captured Garcia, nor could they understand his motives. It seemed as though Garcia was taunting the DEA, believing himself to be smarter and capable of staying hidden forever. By June 1989, Garcia was still completely off the radar, and the DEA continued to track his wife Anita and their 12-year-old child, but they too had vanished without a trace. With Garcia's family gone, the DEA suspected that he had severed all ties with the U.S. and was trying to disappear permanently. In the age of globalization, it was entirely possible to move quickly and easily to anywhere in the world, as long as one had enough money. Realizing the importance of time, investigators focused on tracking down and seizing Garcia's assets to prevent him from fleeing further. Upon closely reviewing his financial records, the DEA uncovered something suspicious. Garcia claimed to have borrowed money from an Italian businessman to purchase his new luxury home. However, the investigation quickly proved this loan was fabricated, a clever trick by Garcia to cover up using drug money to buy real estate. The in-depth investigation revealed the source of Garcia's mysterious finances, a $420,000 wire transfer from a Swiss bank in May 1987. The DEA immediately requested access to Garcia's Swiss accounts from the Swiss authorities, but when the agencies pinpointed the bank, Garcia had already been one step ahead. The account had been closed. Undeterred, the DEA continued to dig deeper into Garcia's financial maze. Their persistence paid off when they discovered the existence of a second account in Luxembourg. This could be a crucial lead in locating Garcia. With renewed hope, the DEA decided to expand their search and enlisted the help of Interpol. Interpol's global network is a powerful tool in tracking down international criminals. When an Interpol notice is issued, it spreads to all member countries. This system allows wanted individuals' information to be compared with data from multiple sources: hotels, borders, financial transactions. Every little move Garcia made could become a vital clue leading to his arrest. The hunt for Garcia had now become an international effort, with thousands of eyes watching for any trace of this former DEA agent turned fugitive. Luxembourg, a small country nestled between France and Germany, may be modest in size, but holds significant economic power. Its strategic location and reputation as a financial haven made Luxembourg a hub for international criminals. The DEA quickly contacted Pierre Conan, an Interpol agent in Luxembourg, and asked him to track down Garcia, a highly dangerous individual. This mission was particularly challenging because Garcia wasn't a typical criminal, but a former, well-trained agent familiar with counterintelligence tactics and skilled at evading detection. Conan began his investigation at the bank where Garcia had conducted transactions, but once again, they were one step too late. Garcia had closed the account and withdrawn $3 million in cash. For the bank manager, this transaction was unforgettable. Garcia stuffed the money into a plastic bag, over $3 million, and asked, "Would you mind stepping outside with me? I'll show you my ride." The bank manager guessed it would surely be a luxury sports car, but surprisingly, there was no Ferrari, just a bicycle. The bank manager also noticed a rental sticker from a local hotel, a key clue that could help Conan track down Garcia, the former DEA agent who had now become a drug kingpin. Garcia appeared in Luxembourg in June 1989 and quickly disappeared with $3 million. Interpol believed that if Garcia was still in Luxembourg, this would be a rare opportunity to catch him. Despite being smart and cunning, but Garcia was still a foreigner in an unfamiliar land, which made him easier to identify compared to being in California. The last clue about Garcia was the image of him cycling with a plastic bag containing $3 million. The Interpol agents immediately followed this lead to a nearby hotel, where the staff easily recognized Garcia as a familiar guest. Conan continued the investigation and discovered that Garcia had made several phone calls from his hotel room to a local travel agency. At the agency, a young employee clearly remembered Garcia, who had given her a lot of work. They determined that Garcia had flown from Luxembourg to Paris multiple times, but tracking him further proved difficult. However, they hoped he would resurface soon. Conan shifted his focus to tracking Garcia's money, guessing that the $3 million in cash might still be in Luxembourg. Logic suggested that after withdrawing such a large sum, Garcia may have deposited it into another account at a different bank. However, surveys of the local banks yielded no results. So, where had Garcia moved the money? In Los Angeles, investigators developed a new theory. When hunting a fugitive, learning about their interests and passions could provide valuable clues. They recalled Garcia's particular passion for Grand Prix racing. However, searching for one man among thousands of spectators at the Grand Prix in France in July seemed like an impossible task. This event attracted large crowds, creating the perfect environment for Garcia to blend in and disappear. The hunt for Garcia had now turned into a complex chess game, where every move could lead to a breakthrough or failure. The DEA and Interpol persisted, scouring hotel records and nationwide booking lists, all in an effort to track down Garcia. And then a glimmer of hope appeared in Paris. On July 3rd, 1989, just days before the Grand Prix race, French police working with the DEA and Interpol discovered that Garcia's wife and son had checked into a hotel in Paris. They suspected Garcia might be in France for the race and quickly dispatched agents to monitor his wife, hoping Garcia would show up. However, while agents focused on Paris, Garcia made a foolish mistake less than 200 miles away. In Luxembourg, Garcia visited a travel agency to exchange an unused plane ticket worth about $200. Incredibly, a man on the run with millions of dollars was recklessly putting himself in danger for such a small sum. The female travel agent realized the opportunity and skillfully stepped outside to call Conan, informing him that Garcia was preparing to leave and urgently asking the police to act fast. Sensing the urgency, Conan instructed the agent to delay Garcia by any means necessary. In a tense atmosphere, Conan and his team quickly grabbed their weapons, jumped into the car, and began a race against time. Every second counted and could determine the outcome of this months-long manhunt. After more than 7 months on the run, Garcia had finally resurfaced, and Interpol agent Conan was facing a once-in-a-lifetime chance to apprehend this dangerous criminal. The situation was extremely tense, as even the slightest mistake could turn the innocent travel agent into a hostage or worse. With only 2 of them facing a former DEA agent-turned-drug kingpin, Conan couldn't help but feel anxious, but his determination remained strong. They approached Garcia, drawing their guns simultaneously. The first thing Garcia saw were 2.357 Magnum guns pointed straight at his head. Conan later remarked on the irony that Garcia was caught because of $200, such a small sum compared to the millions he had made from drug trafficking. However, the arrest was just the first step. The next challenge was extraditing Garcia to the U.S. The DEA sought the help of Mary Jo Gron, a criminal extradition expert from Europe with the Department of Justice. Grin discovered a major obstacle. The extradition treaty with Luxembourg was outdated and lacked provisions for temporary detention. Undeterred, Grin negotiated with Luxembourg authorities, and luckily, they found a local law allowing them to hold Garcia for 30 days if the U.S. provided enough evidence. This was a slim but crucial chance. To ensure Garcia's extradition, U.S. prosecutors had to present all 26 of his charges before a Luxembourg court. However, they faced a tough problem. They still hadn't located the money Garcia was accused of laundering. Without concrete evidence, after 30 days, Luxembourg would be forced to release Garcia, no matter how serious his crimes were. The clock started ticking, and investigators had to race against time to solidify the case or risk Garcia slipping through the cracks of the law once more. While U.S. officials worked to secure the extradition, Conan continued to monitor Garcia in prison, hoping he would make a mistake and reveal a clue about the missing money. The situation became more complicated when both Garcia's wife and his girlfriend took turns visiting him. His wife in the morning, his girlfriend in the afternoon. It was clear that both women loved Garcia, or at least loved his $3 million. Conan decided to exploit this situation, setting up surveillance on both women, hoping one of them would lead them to the hidden money. However, the surveillance yielded nothing, and neither woman acted suspiciously. Conan began to suspect that Garcia's wife had been trained to recognize surveillance, making the task extremely difficult. Determined to find the money, Conan and his team shifted their focus to analyzing the documents Garcia had left in 2 suitcases. They uncovered an important clue, a hidden number in his notes. This number led them to a bank in Luxembourg. Although there was no active account under Garcia's name, but they discovered a closed account with nearly $3 million under one of his aliases. The bank manager recalled that Garcia's wife had visited a few days after his arrest, carrying a power of attorney to withdraw all the money. Police quickly sent out alerts to all banks in Luxembourg, instructing them to watch for any accounts opened or closed during the time Garcia was arrested. This effort finally paid off. They discovered that both Garcia's wife and his girlfriend had opened multiple accounts under different names to spread out the $3 million. Finally, the DEA had enough evidence to extradite Garcia to the U.S. and hold him for a long time. The case quickly expanded as Garcia's wife, Anita, and his girlfriend were both arrested, and all bank accounts connected to them were seized. The Luxembourg police held Garcia for 6 months on charges of using a false passport, while the DEA and the U.S. Department of Justice prepared extradition papers based on 6 drug-related charges in Los Angeles. Garcia's accomplices, Brian Harford and Williams, had already pleaded guilty to drug trafficking. Harford was sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Williams received 5 years. In exchange, both agreed to testify against Garcia. In Luxembourg, Garcia's wife was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and his girlfriend was sentenced to 3 years. However, both fled while out on bail and have yet to serve their sentences. On November 15, 1991, Garcia finally faced justice in a U.S. court. One of the most important witnesses was Victor Guerrero, Garcia's close friend and an undercover FBI agent. Guerrero shared, "This was the first time I had to testify against a friend, but it was the right thing to do. As a law enforcement officer, my duty is to tell the truth, whether it's a friend or a foe." On April 16, 1991, Garcia was convicted of trafficking cocaine and heroin along with laundering millions of dollars through European banks. He was fined $1.6 million and sentenced to 80 years in prison. For years, Garcia and his accomplices had used their positions to cover up their drug trafficking operations. One investigator commented, "In the war on drugs, sometimes it feels like we're trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. Some people like Garcia succumb to temptation and fall into a life of crime." Thanks to the close cooperation between the DEA, Interpol, and Luxembourg police, Garcia and his accomplices paid the price for their crimes. They now face years behind bars alongside the very drug dealers they once arrested. This story serves as a wake-up call and an important lesson, not meant to glorify or romanticize criminal behavior. Al Capone is regarded as the most notorious gangster in history and one of the leading figures during the Prohibition era in the United States in the 1920s. The man known as Scarface has inspired countless films, books, and documentaries, shaping the mafia image we recognize today. Today's story will take us deep into the complex criminal life of Al Capone, from the impoverished alleys of the Brooklyn slums to the luxurious and powerful lifestyle of a gangster. Capone hired up to 1,000 gunmen and bribed nearly half of the city's police force. The purpose of this story is to recount historical events, provide information, and educate rather than glorify or romanticize criminal activities. Al Capone's real name was Alphonse Gabriel Capone, born in 1899 in New York's Brooklyn neighborhood. His parents were Italian immigrants who came to the U.S. in search of a better future for their children. Al Capone's father, Gabriel Capone, was a barber, while his mother, Teresa, was a seamstress. Despite living in difficult conditions, but they worked hard to raise their 9 children. Like most immigrant families of that time, the Capone family had to work tirelessly to make a living, always obeying the law and striving to integrate into their new country despite language, cultural, and religious barriers. Al Capone grew up in a poor slum riddled with crime and poverty in Brooklyn, which profoundly influenced his character. He quickly developed a brutal and violent demeanor. At the age of 14, he formed his first gang, called the Navy Street Gang, named after the neighborhood where he lived. This gang was created to fight against harassment of Italian women by Irish boys. As the leader, Capone quickly displayed his innate leadership skills, which would follow him throughout his life. By the age of 19, Capone married Mary Coughlin, an Irish girl he met at a bar, and the couple later had one child named Albert Francis. At this time, Capone's future was quite uncertain because after dropping out of school at an early age, he had no choice but to earn a living on the streets to support his family. It was during his frequent visits to bars in New York that Al Capone began to interact with notorious mobsters and gradually stepped into the world of organized crime. Here, Capone successfully joined a new gang that included famous gangsters like Johnny Torrio, Frankie Yale, and Lucky Luciano. From these men, Capone learned and began to delve deeper into New York's underground world. Capone started his criminal career when he was hired by Frankie Yale to work at a business that was both a bar and a brothel called Harvard Inn. Capone's main job was to collect money from customers, threaten them with violence if necessary, and control the flow of money from the prostitutes to prevent embezzlement. In other words, Capone was the protector of this bar. Fights and even murders became commonplace, and Capone gradually immersed himself in that violent atmosphere. Before long, he had crafted his legend with the nickname Scarface, a name that would follow him for the rest of his life. As he grew more accustomed to his new position, Capone gained increasing respect from his colleagues. He became a bartender at Frankie Yale's bar, and it was during this time that Capone received his famous scar. According to reports, Capone met a girl at the bar and flirted with her, even uttering some insulting remarks. The girl bluntly rejected him and then complained to her brother, a gangster named Frank Galluccio. Drunk and angry, Frank pulled out a bottle opener and attacked Capone. Although Capone managed to dodge most of the blows, but he was still slashed with 2 cuts on his cheek, one of which stretched from his ear to his mouth. That deep scar embarrassed Capone, and he always tried to hide it. However, it ultimately became a defining mark associated with his image throughout his life. Incredibly, Al Capone once attempted to distance himself from the world of organized crime after marrying Mary Coughlin. He desired a respectable life to protect his family, which was reflected in his decision to leave Frankie Yale's bar and move to Baltimore, where he found work as an accountant. This opportunity allowed him to develop financial management skills, which would later become crucial during Prohibition when he controlled millions of dollars. However, Capone's normal life did not last long. On November 14th, 1920, his father passed away from a heart attack, forcing him to return to New York and fall back into criminal associations. Once he was back in the underworld, Capone quickly gained a reputation as a thug who was not afraid to use violence, even willing to kill if necessary. There were rumors that he had killed a prostitute suspected of embezzling money or even murdered a friend for not paying at the bar where he worked. Capone's cold-bloodedness and violence made many in the gang unhappy, including Frankie Yale and Lucky Luciano. To avoid police attention, they decided to temporarily move Capone out of the city to calm the situation and protect the gang from judicial scrutiny. Al Capone's task was to join Johnny Torrio's gang in Chicago, as Torrio needed someone he could trust to assist him in complex criminal activities, and Capone was exactly the person he was looking for. Receiving $2,000 from Lucky Luciano, Capone took the first train to Chicago, a place that would shape his legend. It was Torrio, the mentor who completely changed Capone's life. In 1921, amid Prohibition, when the production and consumption of alcohol were entirely banned in the U.S., Capone moved to Chicago with his family. He arrived with a single goal: to learn about organized crime mechanisms and rise to power in the criminal world. To achieve this, he placed his trust in Johnny Torrio, whom Capone quickly came to regard as his mentor. While working with Torrio, Capone realized that to advance in the underworld, he needed to use his intellect more than just relying on violence. He started with minor roles in low-end brothels and soon got promoted to bartender in one of Torrio's important bars. Like other bars, this place was not a cozy spot for drinking, as fights and murders occurred regularly. However, Capone proved very skilled in his job and even became Torrio's trusted right-hand man. At this point, Capone began earning significant money through activities such as bootlegging, prostitution, extortion, and sports betting, all of which generated enormous profits for the mafia. Under Torrio's leadership, their crime empire exploded with a series of brothels and speakeasies popping up all over Chicago. But things did not last long when William E. Dever was elected as the new mayor of Chicago. Right upon taking office, he aimed to crack down on illegal gambling and bootlegging. Many bars were shut down, forcing gangsters like Capone and Torrio to leave Chicago. With no other option, they decided to relocate their operations to the suburbs in Cicero. In Cicero, Johnny Torrio planned to turn the city into the center of bootlegging and sports betting. Their goal was to expand their criminal activities and gain control over the entire city and its infrastructure. However, to achieve this, they needed to ensure that Republican candidate Joseph Z. Clenha won the upcoming election. Otherwise, all their operations would be disrupted. Thus, Capone's gang began a campaign to manipulate the election in favor of Clenha. Capone was not alone in this. He brought along his two brothers for support. On March 31st, 1924, Election Day, the gangsters used violence and guns to intimidate voters. They forced those going to vote to select Clenha, even escorting voters to the polling stations to ensure their ballots had Clenha's name. Those who refused to comply were threatened with being shot on the spot. The situation spiraled out of control, and honest voters sought help from Judge Edmund K. Uretsky in an effort to stop the manipulation. Noticing that tensions were escalating, Judge Edmund K. Uretsky immediately dispatched 70 undercover police officers to Cicero to mingle with the crowd and control the violent situation. As they exited their vehicles, the police encountered Frank Capone, Al Capone's brother, who was trying to draw a gun from his pocket, mistakenly thinking it was a raid by a rival gang. In the midst of the chaos, Frank Capone prepared for the worst, but before he could react, he was shot dead on the spot by the police. They opened fire on him, shooting relentlessly until they ran out of bullets, leaving his body riddled with holes. Despite this tragic incident, the riots continued until the voting concluded. Fortunately for Al Capone and Johnny Torrio, their election manipulation efforts were not in vain. Their supported candidate, Joseph Z. Clenha, was successfully re-elected, allowing their crime empire to continue expanding. Although the election victory was achieved, but the price paid was too high. Al Capone witnessed the tragic death of his brother, Frank Capone, less than a month after the chaotic election in Cicero. Al Capone and Torrio wasted no time in opening a new casino, raking in nearly $1.5 million in just the first year, a staggering amount at that time. Cicero quickly had over 150 casinos operating under their control, where alcohol continued to be served despite the ban. In the context of Prohibition, bootlegging became a hugely profitable venture. However, Italian gangs were not the only ones wanting to control this market. Other gangs, including Irish gangs, had been present long before and were not willing to give up their position easily. A bloody confrontation between factions began to erupt during Prohibition. The Irish gang, led by Dean O'Banion, attacked the Italian gang, who controlled a large portion of the bootlegging market. Their goal was clear: to eliminate Johnny Torrio at all costs. Although the Irish gang made several assassination attempts on Torrio, but all failed, giving Torrio the opportunity for revenge. On November 10th, 1924, about 5 months after the Irish gang's first attack, Dean O'Banion was killed in his flower shop, shot twice in the chest and twice in the neck. This assassination was carried out by 3 of Torrio's henchmen, Frankie Yale, John Scalise, and Albert Anselmi. Although the Irish gang had eliminated their main rival, but they did not back down. O'Banion's death sparked a fierce revenge from them. In January 1925, 2 Irish gangsters, Himmy Weiss and Bugs Moran, plotted another assassination attempt on Torrio. This time their plan came close to success, nearly costing Torrio his life. Fortunately, he miraculously escaped death. After this incident, Torrio declared that he was fed up with the rampant violence in Chicago and decided to retire. He handed over control of the crime empire to Al Capone, who then became the official leader of the gang. Surprisingly, Capone did not take any revenge after the assassination attempt on Torrio. This may have been because he was busy dealing with another gang war with the Jenna family, a fearsome Sicilian mafia family that had caused him significant damage. Al Capone could not overlook the Irish gang, who were eager to avenge Dean O'Banion's death. To quench their thirst for revenge, Capone devised a plan to eliminate them. His first target was Hemi Weiss. Capone organized a team of 5 hitmen, including Frank Nitti, Antonio Cardo, Frank Diamond, Albert Anselmi, and John Scalise with the mission to assassinate Weiss. On October 11th, 1926, Al Capone's hit squad prepared for the assassination by closely monitoring Hemi Weiss's movements for an entire week. They waited for the perfect moment to strike until the opportunity presented itself. When they saw Weiss step out of a store with 3 bodyguards, Capone's gunmen immediately opened fire, ruthlessly gunning him down. This was one of the most formidable rivals that Capone's gang had faced, and now Al Capone had only one thing left to do: eliminate Bugs Moran, the sole bootlegger in Chicago. In April 1927, former Chicago Mayor William H. Thompson was appointed again, bringing an advantage to Capone and his family. After 5 years of exile, he was finally able to return to their former headquarters. The new mayor turned a blind eye to organized crime, allowing the gangsters to expand their influence without police interference. At this point, Bugs Moran was the last obstacle standing between Capone and his total control of the market. Violent conflicts between Moran and Capone spread terror across the streets of Chicago. To end this war, Capone devised a plan. On February 14, 1929, while vacationing at a villa in Florida, Capone ordered some of his men to go to one of Bugs Moran's warehouses, disguised as police officers. The hired hitmen ordered the 7 people present in the building to line up against the wall. They were quite confident and complied without hesitation, thinking this was just a routine check that would be resolved with a surprise bribe. However, Capone's gunmen unexpectedly opened fire, turning Moran's warehouse into a veritable slaughterhouse, with all 7 men killed on the spot. When identifying the bodies, Capone's men suddenly realized that Bugs Moran was not among them. In fact, he had managed to escape just minutes before when he saw the police arriving at the warehouse. However, Moran, who had miraculously survived the Valentine's Day massacre, was severely psychologically affected. He no longer wished to fight Al Capone, gradually distancing himself from large-scale heists and only engaging in petty thefts. His gangster career ended when he was arrested for a bank robbery. He died in 1957 while serving his sentence. In the end, Al Capone had eliminated all his rivals, and complete control over the underworld in Chicago became a reality. From January 16th to 19th, 1929, the first ever summit of organized crime in America was held. The country's top mafia bosses gathered in Atlantic City to discuss their future. Al Capone was present, particularly to keep an eye out for anyone who might try to double-cross him, escorted by major figures from the underworld such as Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, Albert Anastasia, and Willie Moretti. The purpose of this conference was to ease tensions among the various mafia families, thereby avoiding conflicts that could severely damage their business operations. However, at this conference, Capone was not well regarded. He was criticized for attracting too much media attention since the infamous Valentine's Day massacre. Consequently, he was advised to keep a low profile for a while. To hide away, Al Capone chose the most drastic solution: prison. On January 16th, after leaving the conference in Atlantic City, Capone arranged with the Philadelphia police to arrest him for carrying a weapon. For him, this was the only way to stay off the FBI's radar, an agency that was increasingly taking a serious interest in his activities. As a result, he was sentenced to 1 year in prison, a relatively light sentence that was later reduced. Capone believed that once he served his time, he could return to business as usual, but things were not that simple. The Valentine's Day massacre had seriously tarnished his image in the eyes of the media and the public. To regain his reputation, Al Capone frequently attended major sporting events such as boxing matches, baseball games, horse races, and dog races. At these events, he often appeared alongside politicians, who at the time were unashamed to be seen with him. However, they were also concerned about their own image as the government sought to eliminate organized crime in Chicago. Capone did his best to showcase himself, and at that time, he was generating nearly $120 million in revenue annually, equivalent to about $1.5 billion today. By then, money was no longer what he needed, so Capone invested time in restoring his reputation by spending on helping the poor, especially during the Great Depression of 1929. He opened a soup kitchen to provide free meals for the destitute and homeless. For him, this was a way to get closer to the people and the working class. His goal was to build an image as a Robin Hood, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. However, this phony charity only bought him time and attention from the media, although it didn't last long. After the Valentine's Day massacre, Al Capone shocked public opinion, particularly with the way his men coldly eliminated Bugs Moran's gang. The case received widespread media coverage and stirred public sentiment. Capone's public appearances and charitable activities did not change the situation. He had reached a point of no return. The government had made its choice. They wanted to take down Capone, who had become their #1 enemy. However, taking him down in Chicago was very complicated because, at the height of his power, Capone was so influential that even the law could do nothing against him. At that time, Al Capone's army was stronger than the Chicago police, and even the county authorities could not bring him to trial for the horrific crimes attributed to him, such as bootlegging, extortion, pimping, gambling, and murder, all without any evidence. The entire country believed Capone was a criminal, but no one could prove it. Even Eliot Ness, a famous agent in the fight against Prohibition at that time, could not find evidence to convict Capone. The government and the FBI had no choice but to seek an alternative solution. The government believed that the best way to put Capone behind bars was to prosecute him for tax evasion, which would provide a legitimate charge for the authorities. Although Capone held millions of dollars, but no tax returns had been filed under his name. The government then discovered a loophole and immediately exploited it, assigning a team of agents from the Treasury Department to gather evidence to take down the Chicago kingpin. In 1931, an accountant named Frank J. Wilson uncovered solid evidence regarding one of Al Capone's income sources. This income stemmed from several gambling registrations that included Capone's name. On June 5, 1931, he was indicted for tax fraud, and his trial began on October 6, 1931 in federal court in Chicago. This was an internationally significant trial with media coverage from around the world unprecedented for such an event. It was not just a simple trial, but a confrontation between the entire United States and a notorious gangster. During the trial, Capone was not worried. He believed he could be sentenced to a maximum of 2 years in prison if he pleaded guilty before the judges. As soon as the jurors were selected, Capone, as usual, attempted to bribe them. However, things were no longer as straightforward as before. The jurors were replaced at the last minute, and from that point, the trial took a completely different direction. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Capone guilty of tax fraud. 6 days later, the sentence was handed down. The gangster was sentenced to 11 years in prison, an unusual sentence since, at that time, tax evasion rarely exceeded 2 years. Al Capone was transferred to Cook County Jail. His time there was relatively comfortable and pleasant. He had a private cell with a shower, access to a phone, and even a means to transfer money remotely. His henchmen and political friends could visit him whenever he wanted, and during that time, everything seemed to be going well. He was enjoying peaceful days in prison. However, karma began to catch up with him. The life of the most famous gangster in America began to enter its darkest phase as an illness ravaged his physical and mental health. Doctors diagnosed him with syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease that he likely contracted in his youth while engaging with prostitutes. He then received news that he was being transferred to Atlanta Prison, a much stricter facility. At the age of 33, his health continued to decline as the syphilis reached its 3rd stage, leading to gradual cognitive impairment affecting him. However, his nightmare was not yet over. In August 1934, he was transferred to another prison, the Federal Penitentiary at Alcatraz, which the government created to house the most dangerous criminals in the country. Here, visits were limited to once a month. Physical contact with visitors was prohibited, and radios, newspapers, and reading materials were not allowed. Work in the prison was a privilege, not a right, and inmates were isolated in small cells, unable to communicate with other prisoners, with no way to escape. Thus, Capone had no choice but to continue serving his sentence in this extremely strict prison. The syphilis was taking a toll on him faster than expected as his condition worsened and doctors were compelled to move Capone to the hospital. His dire state led to his permanent departure from Alcatraz. Capone spent his final years in his Florida mansion surrounded by family. At this point, he was merely a shadow of his former self with a personality resembling that of a 12-year-old, causing him to constantly confuse illusion with reality. Finally, on January 25th, 1947, Al Capone, nicknamed Scarface, died of a heart attack at the age of 48. This concludes today's story, intended to inform and educate without glorifying or romanticizing criminal activities. On March 18, 2021, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel took their power struggle to a shocking new level, shaking all of Mexico. In a park in Guadalajara, police discovered a body tightly wrapped in black plastic with multiple gunshot wounds to the head. A bloody sign pinned to the victim's chest bore the chilling message, "Traitor El Cholo." El Cholo, once a close lieutenant of El Menco, the CJNG kingpin, had dared to break away and form his own gang, directly challenging the infamous cartel. The CJNG, notorious for its relentless brutality, did not let it slide. The discovery of El Cholo's body was more than just a warning, it was a declaration. Anyone who dares to betray will meet the same fate. This was just one of countless times gangs dared to clash with Mexico's ruthless cartels. Another horrific example was the Acapulco massacre on January 8, 2011. Outside a famous shopping center, Mexican police found 15 male bodies, all brutally tortured. 14 of the victims had signs attached to them, signed by the Sinaloa cartel, led by El Chapo Guzman. The message was clear. The Sinaloa cartel had eliminated enemies standing in the way of their ambition to fully control the city and its drug routes. The South Pacific Cartel, which had emerged in 2010 as a branch of the Beltran-Leyva cartel, became the target of Sinaloa's wrath. Known for its grotesque violence, including recruiting a 12-year-old child as an executioner, this gang did not last long. Within a year, most of its members had either been arrested or killed in cold blood. The reason was simple. They dared to face one of the world's most merciless cartels. Since its founding in the late 1980s, the Sinaloa cartel, under the leadership of figures like El Chapo and Ismael El Mayo Zambada, had steadily expanded its power through bloody confrontations with rival cartels and even the Mexican government. Despite numerous arrests and drug seizures, but Sinaloa continued to thrive thanks to its sophisticated smuggling techniques, such as cross-border tunnels between the U.S. and Mexico. When El Chapo was captured for the third time after 2 bold prison escapes, the world finally began to grasp the boundless brutality of this man. In 2019, after being extradited to the U.S. for 3 years, El Chapo finally faced trial. One of the most shocking stories from the trial came from El Chapo's former bodyguard, Isaías Valdez Rios, nicknamed Memon. He recounted how El Chapo was a bloodthirsty man who never forgave any enemy, even if they had once been allies. 3 former Sinaloa cartel members, who had later switched to a rival gang, were savagely tortured by El Chapo for hours. He beat them until their bones shattered and their bodies were completely disfigured before shooting them in the head and throwing their corpses into a fire. This story is just the tip of the iceberg of the brutal violence of Mexico's cartels. In the battle for power, there is no room for weakness or betrayal. On November 18, 2023, the atmosphere in Tijuana was on the brink of exploding. A group of 6 local and state police officers hatched a reckless plan to steal a large shipment of drugs from the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most brutal cartels in the world. With unimaginable boldness, they betrayed their oath, not only becoming criminals, but deciding to take on Los Chapitos, the 3 sons of El Chapo and El Mayo Zambada, who have maintained the cartel's bloody grip on power, even with El Chapo locked in a maximum security prison in the U.S. Soon after the heist, it didn't take long for the Sinaloa cartel to figure out what had happened. Within hours, all of Tijuana was plunged into the shadow of revenge. An armed group unleashed a furious attack on the federal prosecutor's office with 30 bullets riddling the building. This was just the beginning. Not long after, a city police officer suspected of being involved in the heist was shot dead on the street. A cold, inevitable death. However, even that wasn't enough to quell the cartel's fury. On November 24th, another burst of gunfire tore through the silent air, striking the state prosecutor's office. Fortunately, no one was injured. 3 days later, death struck again. A state detective under investigation for his involvement in the heist was brutally shot inside his car while refueling. He seemed to have realized his fate just before the shooting, but all efforts to escape were futile. His car only moved a few meters before crashing into a lamppost, and he died slumped over the steering wheel. The killers fled on motorcycles, vanishing into the chaos of the night. The retaliation escalated, and not just one, but 2 other police officers were assassinated in broad daylight. One of them had refused to join the witness protection program, and the price he paid was his life. The cartel's vengeance never stops at just a few names, and Tijuana had become a bloody battleground, where every gunshot served as a reminder that no one could escape the Sinaloa cartel's retribution. This wasn't the first time the cartel clashed with the Mexican government. On October 17, 2019, the arrest of Ovidio Guzman Lopez, son of El Chapo, sparked the fury of more than 700 gunmen. They threatened to kill civilians en masse and attacked a military housing complex, forcing the government to release Ovidio just hours after his capture. The Mexican president was compelled to order his release to prevent further bloodshed. However, Ovidio's freedom didn't last long. In 2023, he was arrested again and extradited to the U.S., where he may spend the rest of his life in prison, just like his father. Though Ovidio was captured, but the Sinaloa cartel continues to operate powerfully. His 2 brothers, Ivan and Jesus Guzman Salazar, still run the drug empire, facing arrest warrants from both Mexico and the U.S. These chapitos not only continue their drug trafficking, but are also infamous for their cruelty in torturing their enemies. Reports from the U.S. Department of Justice reveal the brutal torture methods they use, from bottle capping, electric shocks, to pouring hot chili peppers into their victims' wounds. Some unlucky ones were even fed to tigers, where it didn't matter whether they were dead or alive. Facing the cartel, whether as a cop or a farmer, always leads to a grim fate. On December 8th, 2023, in Texcaltitlan, a small village southwest of Mexico City, local residents could no longer endure the cartel's terror. Desperate and frustrated, they decided to rise up, arming themselves with whatever they could find. But the biggest question wasn't how long they could fight, but how the cartel would react when confronted with this unexpected rebellion. On December 8th, the tension in the village was palpable. A fierce clash erupted after the gang decided to double the tax they demanded from the poor farmers. The villagers had barely managed to pay the initial extortion fee, but this time the cartel's demands were beyond their capacity. The previous harvest had been disastrous, leaving them nearly destitute. One desperate farmer said, "We can't survive. If we don't fight, we'll starve to death anyway." With nothing left to lose, the villagers decided to resist the cartel. They gathered, armed with whatever they could, such machetes, sticks, old hunting rifles, all preparing for a life-or-death battle. The meeting was set at the local soccer field, usually a place for children to play, but today it had become a battlefield. The cartel arrived armed to the teeth, even wearing fake Mexican military uniforms to intimidate. But the courage and rage of the villagers were not easily crushed, as this was a fight for their very survival, to live or to die. Chaos erupted as soon as the first shot was fired. No one knew who shot first, but both sides immediately plunged into a bloody battle. Despite their crude weapons, but the farmers did not retreat. They charged forward with all the determination they could muster to face the ruthless criminals. The battle didn't last long, but it was enough to turn the soccer field into a sea of blood. When the gunfire subsided, a total of 14 people had fallen, including 4 farmers and 10 cartel members. Among the dead was Comandante Payaso, the brutal leader of La Familia Michoacana in the area, who had ordered the increase in extortion fees. When he fell, the remaining cartel members fled in fear, leaving behind their trucks and the bodies of their comrades, which the villagers did not hesitate to burn on the spot. Though victorious, but sorrow still enveloped the village. One resident said in frustration, "We called for help from the Mexican military. We knew this was going to happen, but no one came. We were abandoned." Their cries for help had been ignored, and the government had failed to protect them. This confrontation quickly captured public attention. especially with the presidential election approaching. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador blamed the situation on the growing drug consumption and argued that previous administrations had failed to take care of the youth. Meanwhile, candidate Xochitl Gálvez harshly criticized Obrador's hugs instead of bullets strategy, saying it left citizens like those in Texcaltitlan feeling abandoned. She stated, "The hugs are for criminals while the bullets are for the people." Regardless, the government decided not to prosecute the farmers involved in the clash, deeming it a legitimate act of self-defense. The village briefly felt relieved, but the terror soon returned. On December 27th, La Familia Michoacana retaliated by attacking the village at night, kidnapping 14 people, including police officers who were captured at a checkpoint and a wounded villager from the previous clash. Then on January 16th, 2024, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Police received an anonymous call directing them to a chapel in San Miguel Zinacantepec, where they found 7 of the 14 kidnapped victims. These included 3 women and 4 children, who were discovered in surprisingly good condition, sitting quietly and waiting for the police to rescue them. What had truly happened to the others? And why did the rescued victims know nothing about where they had been held? The biggest question remained. Were the missing still alive, or had they met a gruesome fate for daring to stand up to the cartel? On January 11th, 2020, Karen Lisbeth Yepes Ortiz walked down the aisle, her face glowing with happiness, unaware that her special day was about to turn into the worst nightmare she could imagine. As she stood beside her husband, the notorious drug lord El Calamardo, the two exchanged vows in joy. But suddenly a group of armed men stormed into the church, turning the festive atmosphere into sheer panic. Gunshots echoed through the once peaceful space. The chaos sent everyone into a frenzy, and a bullet struck Karen, causing her to collapse in pain before the stunned eyes of the guests. Meanwhile, the groom was kidnapped by the assailants on the spot, leaving the crowd in disarray. But the situation was far worse than it seemed, as Karen was not only the wife of a drug lord, but also the sister of a notorious cartel leader. Her family had a long-standing feud with the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG. Though CJNG had only been established recently, it quickly rose to become one of the most brutal and influential gangs in Mexico. The Mexican government considered it one of the most dangerous organizations, second only to the Sinaloa cartel. The U.S. Department of Justice has also listed CJNG as one of the 5 most dangerous transnational criminal organizations in the world, responsible for countless deaths both in Mexico and at the U.S. border, all from their bloody hands. CJNG began in 2009 as an offshoot of the Milenio Gang and quickly evolved into the most dangerous cartel. Its leader, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, also known as El Mencho, was once a police officer in Jalisco. His brutality wasn't just a means to an end, it was a twisted pleasure. This mentality permeated the entire organization, with CJNG spreading terror through acts of horrific violence such as massacres, acid baths, beheadings, and even cannibalism to train new assassins. One horrifying example occurred during rush hour in Veracruz, where 35 tortured and bound bodies were dumped on the streets as a warning to those who dared oppose them. In another brutal act, they killed a man and his son by strapping explosives to their bodies and blowing them up, filming the gruesome scene and laughing as they watched their victims' terrifying end. Karen's brother, Jose Antonio Yepes Ortiz, also known as El Maro, was the leader of the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, notorious for stealing fuel from pipelines in Guanajuato. A bloody war erupted between CJNG and Santa Rosa de Lima when a banner appeared in Guanajuato threatening the president of Mexico to withdraw security forces from the state or there would be more bloodshed. El Maro quickly denied involvement, but El Mencho refused to believe him and was determined to destroy El Maro's gang. To carry out this goal, CJNG planned a massacre at Karen's wedding. And though the slaughter occurred amidst panic, but El Maro managed to escape without a trace, leaving his sister lying in a pool of blood. The grief and fury he must have felt were unimaginable. But El Maro couldn't hide forever. On August 2nd, 2020, he was captured in a joint operation between the Guanajuato government and Mexico's Public Security Department. Many believed the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel had been crushed, but subsequent events proved otherwise. The war had never truly ended and ghosts from the past continued to haunt, igniting a storm of unprecedented violence in Mexico's cartel history. In January 2024, a shocking photo emerged circulating across Mexico, revealing a woman believed to be the current leader of the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. She was suspected of orchestrating a series of massacres and attacks late last year in Guanajuato. From the armed assault on police that killed 2 officers to a firefight that claimed the lives of firefighters, and most notably the massacre at a festival in Salvadera, where 11 people were killed and 12 others injured. The most shocking detail? This woman was none other than Karen Elizabeth Yepes Ortiz. Rumors swirled with suspicion. How could this be? Some speculated she had faked her death to escape CJNG, waiting for the right time to gather enough strength for revenge. Others pointed out that authorities had never officially confirmed her death at the wedding. The sense of mystery deepened as officials remained silent, creating an atmosphere of tension. Whoever this woman truly was, it was clear she had stepped into a deadly war with CJNG, and the outcome was likely to be brutal for CJNG, and neither forgives nor forgets. The following story serves as a chilling reminder of this truth. On March 18th, 2021, Mexican police discovered a horrifying scene. A body wrapped tightly in black trash bags abandoned in a park in Guadalajara. At first, the police thought it was just a dummy because the body was wrapped so tightly, but after closer inspection, they suspected it was none other than Carlos Enrique Sanchez Martinez, a notorious gangster in Mexico. How did they know? Next to the body were 2 handwritten signs, stabbed into the corpse with kitchen knives, bearing the chilling words, El Cholo, Sanchez Martinez's infamous nickname. He had once been a loyal member of CJNG, even rumored to be El Menco's right-hand man. However, driven by ambition and greed, El Cholo made the biggest mistake of his life, betraying CJNG. He was accused of ordering the murder of Marcos Hernandez, also known as El Colombiano, a key financial figure for CJNG. After El Colombiano discovered El Cholo's shady dealings and reported them to El Mencho, things quickly escalated. Soon after, El Cholo created his own gang, Nueva Plaza, with backing from CJNG's biggest enemy, the Sinaloa cartel. These 2 groups launched bloody battles for control of territories. Now the question remains, if you were once part of CJNG and witnessed its brutality firsthand, would you dare stand against them? I can't imagine doing so, but El Cholo did, and he paid a steep price for his decision. On March 18th, 2021, a haunting video surfaced online showing a man in a red lacrosse shirt, sitting in a chair, looking defeated and resigned to his fate. Behind him stood a group of masked men armed and ready for what was about to happen. The man, later identified as El Cholo, began speaking as if reading from a script. He took responsibility for numerous crimes across Mexico, including an attack on the U.S. consulate. Not only did he openly admit his wrongdoings, but he also implicated several high-ranking police officers, claiming they had collaborated with him in attempts to bring down CJNG. One of the most notable names he mentioned was Omar Garcia Harfuca, a well-known officer famous for his tough tactics and unrelenting resolve in the fight against criminal gangs. The truth and the death lurking behind El Cholo's words seemed like a sentence waiting to be carried out. A chilling lesson in the brutality and betrayal of the criminal underworld, where there is no place for forgiveness. In June 2020, a violent attack nearly cost Harfuca his life. He was severely wounded, and the price he paid was even steeper as 2 of his close friends were killed in the brutal assault. This only fueled his hatred for CJNG, igniting a determination in him that the nation must continue its relentless battle against these cowardly criminal organizations. Shortly after the attack, the Attorney General of Mexico City arrested at least a dozen suspects tied to CJNG, but El Menco's name remained elusive, safe and out of reach. This fueled Harfuca's anger and his drive for revenge. He knew the fight couldn't end until those behind El Cholo's actions paid for their crimes. As the video of El Cholo's frail, fear-stricken confession spread online, Harfuca immediately denied all accusations. He didn't bother with the words of a criminal being held captive by other criminals, and it seemed he knew for certain that those behind El Cholo were none other than CJNG. The cold and determined look in his eyes showed an unwavering confidence. In the video, El Cholo nearly broke down in tears, urging his fellow gang members to abandon the fight and spend more time with their families. With sorrowful eyes, he ended the video with a desperate lament. "Look at me. See how I've ended up?" These words seemed to foreshadow the tragic fate that awaited him. Not long after the video went viral, El Cholo's mutilated body was found tightly wrapped in plastic and placed on a park bench, creating a horrifying scene. He had been shot multiple times in the head, and clear signs of brutal torture were visible on his body before the final bullet ended his suffering. A blood-soaked sign on his chest read, "El Cholo, the traitor." This message served as a chilling warning to anyone who dared to stand against the cruelty of CJNG, a ruthless punishment for those who betrayed them. In the chaotic underworld, Amado Carrillo Fuentes rose to power with the notorious nickname Lord of the Skies, a title that perfectly encapsulated his unique method of operation. Unlike other drug lords of his time, Carrillo built his empire through the skies, amassing a massive fleet of aircraft to transport drugs. This impressive fleet even included large Boeing jets capable of moving up to 6 tons of narcotics in each flight, reaping profits as high as $200 million within a single week. Under Carrillo's astute leadership, the Juarez cartel became one of Mexico's most formidable criminal organizations. Following his defeat of the Cali cartel, Carrillo seized nearly absolute control of the cocaine market, often referred to as white gold. Carrillo's mysterious life journey, marked by his origins, began on December 17, 1956 in a criminal family in Guamacalido, Navalado, Sinaloa, Mexico. He was the nephew of Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, also known as Don Neto, one of the infamous leaders of the Guadalajara cartel. In the 1970s, Carrillo Fuentes was so elusive that even the police had scanned information on him. They only had an old, single photograph with no details of his age or appearance. In contrast to Pablo Escobar, who had a flashy and ostentatious approach, Carrillo operated discreetly and cautiously, always avoiding public attention. Carrillo's career began by managing marijuana plantations for his uncle, Don Neto. This relationship gave him access to powerful figures within the Medellin cartel. With his intelligence, discipline, and loyalty, Carrillo quickly proved himself. Recognizing his potential, Don Neto sent him to the town of Ojinaga in Chihuahua to learn from Pablo Acosta Villarreal, a prominent figure known as the Fox of Ojinaga. Under Villarreal's guidance, Carrillo made significant strides. For more than a decade, he rose from an assistant role to Villarreal's right-hand man. However, his ambition for power led Carrillo to make a ruthless decision. In April 1987, he ordered the assassination of his own mentor. This plan was executed with the help of Gonzales Calderon, director of Mexico's anti-narcotics unit. Gonzales was later accused of accepting bribes to protect drug lords from various organizations. The story of the Lord of the Skies is more than a tale of crime. It is a dark chapter in Mexico's history, where power and greed drove people to betray mentors and friends alike, all for the sake of climbing higher in the treacherous underworld. Armed with $1 million and precise intelligence on Pablo Acosta Villarreal's location, Calderon successfully carried out the assassination, paving the way for Amado Carrillo to take over the Ojinaga drug routes. This pivotal step would eventually lead Carrillo to establish the Juarez cartel, one of Mexico's most powerful criminal syndicates. Although he initially found success in Ojinaga in the late 1980s, Carrillo made a bold decision to relocate to Ciudad Juarez, further solidifying his path to becoming one of the most influential figures in Mexico's organized crime. Here, with his discreet and cautious style, Carrillo swiftly ascended from an ordinary drug trafficker to become the feared Lord of the Skies, a title earned by his vast Boeing fleet capable of carrying up to 6 tons of drugs per flight. This allowed Carrillo to rake in up to $200 million in profits from cocaine and heroin in just 1 week. By 1994, the U.S. government estimated that the Juarez cartel controlled around 60% of the cocaine transported from Colombia through Mexico into the U.S. A major turning point occurred in the late 1980s when John Jairo Velasquez, known as Popeye, the assassin and right-hand man of Pablo Escobar, formed a business alliance with Carrillo. Their goal was to establish a large-scale cocaine transport network from Colombia into the U.S. through San Diego, California, and El Paso, Texas. This alliance was officially solidified in 1988 and quickly dominated the North American drug market, controlling about 80% of cocaine consumption in the region. The alliance between these three kingpins created a nearly flawless criminal machine. Carrillo managed the operations of the Juarez cartel, while Pablo Escobar and Joaquin El Chapo Guzman oversaw cocaine production and distribution, not only in North America, but expanding into European, Asian, and African markets. Their dominance was largely sustained through bribes to authorities at every level from local to federal, including anti-drug agencies. This system allowed them to build an intricate money laundering network, effectively transforming themselves into true billionaires. Externally, they appeared as an unbreakable crime alliance, ready to defend one another against any threat. The combination of power, wealth, and a widespread network of connections formed an unparalleled drug empire in the history of organized crime. However, like any powerful alliance, the three kingpins' criminal empire could not escape internal cracks. Egos and power ambitions gradually weakened the bond between Pablo Escobar and Amado Carrillo Fuentes. Many speculate that tensions began when Escobar faced increasing surveillance, hindering his operational freedom. These shifts hinted at significant changes in the power dynamics within the empire. While Escobar struggled, Carrillo continued to expand his empire. Beyond his massive air fleet, he developed additional maritime routes for drug transport. Unlike Escobar's flashy style, Carrillo maintained a low profile and moved swiftly, making him a significant challenge for law enforcement to track. However, Carrillo's caution did nothing to diminish his ruthless nature. He was bold enough to demand that Colombian drug lords pay for transportation fees in cocaine, enabling him to enter major markets such as Chicago, Atlanta, Omaha, and New York. These moves significantly undermined the Medellin cartel's dominance, which was once regarded as the strongest and most feared cartel of its time. Carrillo also had a remarkable advantage with his extensive bribery network, which included officials and law enforcement personnel both inside and outside Mexico. This allowed him to operate his cocaine trade with minimal interference. The underworld's dynamics began to change dramatically as Colombian authorities became determined to end Pablo Escobar's reign. After nearly a year and a half in hiding, the king of cocaine was eventually ambushed and killed at the end of 1993. Although various theories exist regarding his death, but Escobar's demise fundamentally shifted the balance of power in the criminal world. Amado Carrillo and Joaquin El Chapo Guzman found themselves as the two sole leaders, yet times were no longer as favorable as before. With law enforcement pressure mounting, forced to seek new allies to sustain their empire, the Juarez cartel held its position as a top cocaine supplier managed by some of the most cunning figures in organized crime. Though power structures evolved, but the cartel's vast network and sophisticated operations preserved its far-reaching influence. Like Pablo Escobar, before him Carrillo crafted an image as a hero among locals. He gained admiration through acts of generosity, helping struggling families, building schools, and providing jobs for the impoverished. Yet beneath his philanthropic facade, Carrillo remained a deadly crime lord surrounded by countless enemies. In 1993, he narrowly survived a shocking assassination attempt at the Bali 2 restaurant in southern Mexico City. While dining assassins from the Tijuana cartel stormed in and unleashed gunfire. Thanks to the quick thinking and expertise of his bodyguards, the Lord of the Skies narrowly escaped death. However, his empire began to weaken in December 1996 when General Jesus Gutierrez Rebollo was appointed as Mexico's national anti-drug czar. Under Rebollo's command, several of the Juarez cartel's rivals, including Hector Palma, Lupercio Serratos, and Ivan Taboto, were captured. Tensions escalated as the U.S. implemented an annual drug certification program for the Mexican government. The situation took a turn when an anonymous call shook Mexico. Rebollo's driver accused him of secretly collaborating with Carrillo. The informant alleged that Juarez cartel had bribed Rebollo for operational freedom. Released photos and documents confirmed these claims. In a dramatic press conference, Defense Minister Enrique Cervantes Aguirre accused General Rebollo of betraying the armed forces by protecting Carrillo. This scandal revealed an alarming reality. Corruption had deeply infiltrated the justice system, blurring the line between law enforcement and organized crime. To appease public outrage and uphold justice, the courts sentenced Gutierrez Rebollo to 40 years in prison for serious offenses. In 1997, Rebollo was imprisoned at the maximum security facility Puente Grande, later known as Altiplano, and passed away in 2013, just a day after learning he would complete his sentence under house arrest. This scandal intensified U.S. pressure on Mexico to arrest Amado Carrillo without delay, with law enforcement closing in and a $5 million bounty on his capture. The Lord of the Skies began to feel his empire crumbling. In a desperate move, Carrillo fled to Chile under the alias Roberto Soto Flores. Boldly, he used his real photo on the passport. A risky but clever move, as few people recognized the face of the era's most infamous drug lord. From Chile, Carrillo moved through Argentina and then Uruguay, where he set up a new network for trafficking synthetic drugs to Europe. However, life on the run couldn't last forever. Although authorities lacked a clear image of his face, they tracked his every step, forcing Carrillo to make one final decision: to alter his appearance permanently. On July 3, 1997, Amado Carrillo checked in a Santa Monica hospital in the upscale Polanco neighborhood of Mexico City under the alias Antonio Flores Montes. His goal was to undergo extensive facial reconstruction and liposuction to evade capture by Mexican and U.S. authorities. Under the care of Colombian surgeon Ricardo Reyes, Carrillo endured multiple complex surgeries, including facial alterations. However, the unexpected happened. The Lord of the Skies reportedly died from heart failure attributed to an overdose of anesthesia. Yet those close to Carrillo doubted this version of events. They believed the surgery had succeeded, but he was later injected with a fatal dose of succinylcholine, a drug contraindicated during post-operative care. Official reports stated Carrillo died on July 4, 1997 in room 407. Although genetic testing identified the body, as his numerous odd details fueled doubts about his death. For one, authorities announced Carrillo's death without personally inspecting the body. Additionally, a week after confirmation, the body was found with a thick mustache, a puzzling trait for someone who had just undergone extensive facial surgery. Suspicion only grew when Jose Luis Rodriguez, a police commander with a strong resemblance to Carrillo, mysteriously disappeared right before the death was publicized. This absence led many to believe that Carrillo had faked his death and was enjoying a life of luxury somewhere far from law enforcement's reach. Carrillo's supposed death became one of the greatest mysteries in organized crime. Theories circulated that he had staged his death and fled to another country, or even entered the U.S. Witness Protection Program. As time passed, these speculations remained unforgotten, each carrying a deadly price for uncovering the truth. Months after Carrillo's alleged death, the case took a dark turn. Jamie Godoy, Carlos Avila, and Ricardo Reyes, the doctors involved in Carrillo's surgeries, were found dead, encased in cement-filled barrels along the highway between Mexico City and Acuautla. Their bodies bore signs of brutal torture, and the stench prompted federal highway police intervention. Media sources suggested three possible motives for the murders: revenge by the Juarez cartel for Carrillo's death, silencing the doctors who may have known who ordered his assassination, or concealing the fact that Carrillo might still be alive. When Carrillo's associates were summoned to identify the body, they noted two distinct features: a large, hairy mole on his back and a pronounced scar on his hip, both of which were absent on the corpse. Jamie Olvera, a close associate of Carrillo, insisted that the body was not his. Intriguingly, Olvera, under protection as a key witness, was murdered in 1998. Rumors of Carrillo's survival persisted. González Calderón, a former federal police commander, claimed Carrillo was still alive and living in the U.S., but he was killed in Texas in 2003. Journalist Jose Alfredo Andrade, who had published an investigative book on Carrillo's death in 1999, disappeared without a trace, leading many to believe he was silenced for revealing sensitive information. Throughout his 17-year reign as a drug lord, Carrillo reportedly amassed a fortune estimated at $25 million, invested in real estate and legitimate businesses. As of 2014, his mother still resided on a 24,000 square meter estate in Guanajuato, A final gift from Carrillo, reflecting his desire to offer his family a life far removed from the hardships of his own early years. The mystery surrounding Amado Carrillo Fuentes' fate remains one of the greatest enigmas in the world of organized crime. Each new clue seems only to deepen the mystery, and those who might have held answers appear to have been silenced for good. This may forever remain one of the unanswered secrets in Mexico's criminal underworld. Carrillo left behind an enormous fortune that testified to his power and wealth. In addition to a family ranch he owned, Casa Crater, a lavish 3,500 square meter mansion valued at nearly $3 million. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. His assets included multiple ranches apartments, luxury estates, private jets, a valuable jewelry collection, and an array of other high-end vehicles. Carrillo's colorful life became the inspiration for The Lord of the Skies, a television series that premiered in 2013, spanning 3 seasons and 611 episodes. The series recreated Carrillo's criminal adventures and life story through a fictional character, Aurelio Casillas, to sidestep legal challenges. The show captivated audiences globally, further cementing the legend of the Lord of the Skies beyond Mexico's borders. After Carrillo's mysterious death in 1997, dark times followed for the Carrillo Fuentes family. His demise during a plastic surgery operation intended to change his appearance to evade law enforcement not only left a massive power vacuum in the Juarez cartel, but also initiated a tragic chain of events and retribution within the family. Amado's brother, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, took control of the Juarez cartel, yet rival gangs, especially the Sinaloa cartel, contested his power, leading to intense bloodshed. Vicente was eventually captured in 2014 after years of violent turf wars, delivering a significant blow to the organization. Other family members met similarly tragic fates. Amado's youngest brother, Jose Cruz, vanished without a trace, and his son, Vicente Carrillo Leyva, was arrested due to his involvement with the cartel, underscoring how the criminal legacy seemed almost cursed across generations. Even after the capture or death of key figures, the violence continued to linger, manifesting in the ongoing conflict between the Juarez and Sinaloa cartels in the Juarez-El Paso border region. The saga of the Carrillo family stands as a stark warning. Though crime may bring power and fortune, it ultimately yields nothing but tragedy and unending suffering, not just for the family, but for entire communities. What are your thoughts on this story? Leave your comments below to share with everyone. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.